Montana Territory, 1875. The wind whistled through the hastily constructed auction platform in the dusty mining town of Silver Creek. A scattering of men in worn hats and mud-caked boots stood watching the proceedings with varying degrees of interest. Most were there for the livestock and mining equipment, but there was another item on offer that day that had drawn curious onlookers. Riley Morgan sat atop his chestnut gelding at the edge of the crowd, his 25-year-old face shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His clean-shaven jaw clenched as he watched the auctioneer gesture toward a young woman standing off to the side, her wrists bound with rough rope. Her golden blonde hair hung in tangles around a face that might have been beautiful if not for the bruises and the hollow, vacant look in her blue eyes. She wore a once fine dress of faded blue calico, now tattered and stained. Next up, gentlemen, a bride by contract. This one came west on the bride train, but her intended met with an unfortunate end before she arrived. Papers are all legal and binding for 5 years of domestic service. Starting bid at $20. Riley felt disgust rise in his throat. He had seen this before. Desperate women from back east, lured by promises of marriage and a new life, only to find themselves treated as property when circumstances changed. He had vowed never to involve himself in such matters. The frontier was no place for such entanglements. A man survived out here by depending on no one but himself and his horse. Caring for others only led to heartbreak when disease, Indians, or outlaws inevitably took them away. His parents' slow, painful deaths during his childhood and the loss of his brother in a claim dispute had taught him that lesson all too well. At 25, Riley had built a modest but successful ranch 15 miles outside of town. He worked hard, kept to himself, and that was how he intended to keep it. Loneliness was a small price to pay for peace of mind. $20. Do I hear $20 for this fine young woman? She can cook, clean, and help around your homestead. The crowd shuffled uncomfortably. Even in a rough frontier town, there was something distasteful about this particular auction. A few miners snickered, making crude suggestions. The woman kept her eyes fixed on the ground, her shoulders slumped in defeat. $15? Surely someone will offer 15. The auctioneer's voice grew desperate. Riley could see what was happening. No one wanted to take responsibility for this woman. But if no one bid, she would likely end up working at the Silver Creek Saloon. A fate sometimes worse than death for women with no protectors in these parts. As Riley turned to leave, the woman briefly lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes across the dusty square. Something in that look, not pleading or desperate, but a final flicker of dignity about to be extinguished, stopped him cold. $10. Final offer, gentlemen. Anyone. The words left Riley's mouth before he could stop them. $10. The crowd turned to stare at him. Riley Morgan, the solitary rancher who barely spoke 2 words when he came to town for supplies. Sold. To Mr. Morgan for $10. The auctioneer looked relieved to be done with the uncomfortable business. As Riley approached the platform to complete the transaction, he told himself he was being practical. His housekeeper had died of influenza last winter, and the place was in disarray. This was simply a business arrangement. He would give her fair treatment, a roof over her head, and when her contract was fulfilled, she could go her own way. No attachments, no complications. The woman was led toward him, her contract thrust into his hands. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought, perhaps 22 or 23. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was something about the set of her jaw that suggested strength. Your name? He asked gruffly as he helped her onto his horse. Penelope. Penelope Lawrence, she answered, her voice barely audible, but with the faint trace of an educated Eastern accent. I'm Riley Morgan. My ranch is a few hours' ride from here. He mounted behind her, uncomfortable with the proximity, but seeing no alternative. I expect you to cook and keep house. That's all. As they rode out of town, Riley felt the weight of what he'd done. He had just invited complication into his carefully ordered life, and he already regretted it. Little did he know that this impulsive decision would soon challenge everything he believed about survival on the frontier. The first weeks at the Morgan Ranch were a silent affair. Riley rose before dawn, worked until dusk, and spoke only when necessary. Penelope, for her part, threw herself into restoring order to the neglected ranch house. Despite her slender frame, She worked with a determination that surprised him, scrubbing floors, repairing linens, and preparing simple but satisfying meals. One evening, as Riley sat at the kitchen table cleaning his revolver, he found himself watching her knead dough for the next day's bread. Her blonde hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, and her face had begun to lose its gauntness. Without the fear and exhaustion of those first days, he could see she was actually quite beautiful, with delicate features and expressive blue eyes. "Where did you come from?" "Before the bride train," he asked suddenly, breaking their usual silence. Penelope's hands stilled momentarily. "Philadelphia. My father was a professor at the university there." "What brought you west?" Her eyes remained on the dough. "After my parents died of typhoid, I had few options. The advertisement promised marriage to a respectable rancher. Mr. Peterson had written such gentle letters." She trailed off. "And he died before you arrived," Riley finished for her. "No." Her voice hardened slightly. "He was very much alive when I arrived. But he took one look at me and declared I wasn't what he'd expected. Said I was too thin, too educated, and likely too fragile for frontier life." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "He sold my contract to the auctioneer that same day." Riley felt an unexpected flash of anger. "That wasn't in your paperwork." "Does it matter? One master or another, what's the difference?" There was a quiet dignity in how she said it that made Riley uncomfortable. "I'm not your master," he said sharply. "And when your contract is up, you're free to go wherever you please." Penelope finally looked up at him, her eyes assessing. "That's very noble, Mr. Morgan. But we both know that a woman alone has few options out here. One way or another, survival means dependence." Her words cut too close to the philosophy he'd lived by. Independence was the only security on the frontier. Yet here was this woman, acknowledging her dependence with clear-eyed pragmatism rather than fear. "You should get some sleep," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the turn of the conversation. "The cattle buyer is coming tomorrow. We'll need an early start." That night, Riley lay awake longer than usual, troubled by thoughts he couldn't quite name. He had built his life around the belief that attachments were dangerous, that the only way to survive the frontier was to need no one. Yet there was something about Penelope's quiet strength that challenged this certainty. The next morning brought an unexpected crisis. As Riley prepared to show his cattle to the buyer, his horse threw a shoe. Without a properly shod horse, he couldn't properly demonstrate the cattle's condition by riding among them. The buyer, a notoriously difficult man named Harrington, would surely use this as leverage to lower his offer, money Riley desperately needed to make it through the winter. To his shock, Penelope emerged from the barn leading his backup horse, already saddled. "Your chestnut has a loose shoe," she stated matter-of-factly. "I heard you mention it yesterday. This one should serve you better today." Riley stared at her. "You know horses?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My father believed women should be educated in all matters. I spent summers at my uncle's farm." She handed him the reins. "Your visitor is coming up the road. Good luck, Mr. Morgan." As he rode out to meet Harrington, Riley felt something shift inside him. For years, he had assumed that others could only be burdens to be carried or threats to be avoided. It had never occurred to him that another person might actually make his life easier. The cattle sale went better than expected, with Harrington offering a fair price after seeing the well-maintained herd. When Riley returned to the house, he found a hot meal waiting and clean clothes laid out for him to change into before dinner. "I didn't ask you to do that," he said, gesturing to the clothes. "No," Penelope agreed. "You didn't." That night at dinner, Riley found himself talking more than he had in months, telling Penelope about his plans to expand the ranch's operations in the spring. To his surprise, she asked thoughtful questions and even offered suggestions based on agricultural journals she had found in a dusty box in the attic. "Those were my father's," Riley explained. "He had dreams of making this place more than just a cattle operation." "And what are your dreams, Mr. Morgan?" Penelope asked. The question caught him off guard. "Survival," he answered honestly. "Making it through each season intact." She studied him for a moment. "That's not a dream. That's just existing." Her words stayed with him long after they had retired for the night. Penelope to the small bedroom off the kitchen, and Riley to the main bedroom upstairs. For the first time in years, he wondered if there might be more to life on the frontier than mere survival. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in golds and russets, the dynamic between Riley and Penelope gradually shifted. She no longer moved about the ranch house like a shadow, and he found himself looking forward to their evening conversations. They established a routine that felt almost comfortable. One crisp October morning, Riley was mending a fence when he heard hoofbeats approaching. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, rough-looking men with bandanas pulled up over their faces. Rustlers. They had been plaguing the area for months, striking isolated ranches and making off with cattle before the law could respond. Riley reached for his rifle, but realized with a sinking feeling that he had left it back at the house. The men spotted him and spurred their horses down the slope. "Well, look what we have here," the leader drawled, a tall man with cold eyes. "The lone rancher. Not so tough without your shooting iron, are you?" "I have nothing worth stealing," Riley replied steadily. "My cattle are 2 pastures over, and I don't keep much cash." The rustler laughed. "We'll be the judge of what's worth taking." He nodded to his companions. "Check the house." Riley felt a cold dread seize him. Penelope was alone in the house. "There's no one there," he lied. "Just leave and there won't be trouble." Mighty protective of an empty house, the leader observed shrewdly. "Boys, I think Morgan's been keeping secrets from the town. Let's see what, or who he's hiding." Before Riley could move, the leader's pistol crashed against his temple, sending him sprawling to the ground. Through blurred vision, he saw the men ride toward the house. He struggled to his feet, blood trickling down his face, and staggered after them. He was halfway to the house when he heard a shotgun blast. Then another. His heart seized in his chest as he broke into a run. The scene that greeted him at the farmyard stopped him in his tracks. 2 of the rustlers were backing away, hands raised. Their leader lay on the ground, clutching his leg and howling in pain. And there on the porch stood Penelope, his father's old shotgun held steady in her hands. "The next one goes higher," she called out, her voice firm despite the slight tremor in her arms. "Take him and go." The rustlers grabbed their wounded leader and retreated, casting venomous looks over their shoulders. Riley approached the porch slowly, aware that Penelope was still gripping the shotgun with white knuckles, her face pale but determined. "They'll be back," she said, lowering the weapon as he climbed the steps. "With more men." "Yes," Riley agreed, taking the shotgun gently from her hands. To his surprise, they weren't shaking anymore. "We should leave." "Leave?" Penelope looked at him sharply. "This is your home." "It's just land and buildings," Riley said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "Not worth dying for." Something like disappointment flashed across Penelope's face. "I thought you of all people would understand, Mr. Morgan. Some things are worth fighting for." As he stared at her, this woman who had just defended his home as if it were her own, Riley felt something crack open inside him. All these years, he had convinced himself that caring about anything, anyone, was a weakness the frontier would exploit. Yet here was Penelope, standing her ground not because she had to, but because she chose to. "Why did you do that?" he asked quietly. "You could have hidden. You could have run." Penelope met his gaze steadily. "Because this is my home now too, even if only temporarily." She touched his arm lightly. "You're bleeding. Let me tend to that while we decide what to do next." As she cleaned the cut on his temple, Riley made a decision that went against everything he had believed about survival on the frontier. "We're not leaving," he said. "You're right. Some things are worth fighting for." The smile that lit up Penelope's face sent an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, Riley felt something beyond the dull determination to make it through another day. It terrified him. Word of the attempted rustling spread quickly through the scattered homesteads. To Riley's astonishment, neighbors he barely knew arrived to help fortify the ranch against the rustlers' inevitable return. Men reinforced fences and windows while women prepared food and organized supplies. All the while, they cast curious glances at Penelope, clearly wondering about her presence in the confirmed bachelor's home. "She's my housekeeper," Riley explained stiffly when old Samuel Jenkins raised a bushy eyebrow. "Housekeeper with a mighty fine aim," the old-timer chuckled. "Half the county's talking about how she peppered Vince Harper's leg with buckshot. That man's been terrorizing ranches from here to Helena." Riley felt an unexpected surge of pride at the mention of Penelope's bravery. When he sought her out, he found her in deep conversation with Jenkins' wife, Martha, the 2 of them mapping out defensive positions as if they were military strategists. "The creek provides protection to the west," Penelope was saying, but they could easily approach from the north ridge. Martha nodded appreciatively. You've got a good eye for terrain, dear. Where did a city girl learn such things? My father believed in a practical education, Penelope replied with a small smile. And Mr. Morgan's library has several excellent books on frontier defense. Riley listened, amazed at how quickly Penelope had assessed the ranch's vulnerabilities. She had been paying attention all these months, learning the land just as he had when he first arrived. The realization made him see her in a new light. That evening, after the neighbors had departed with promises to return at the first sign of trouble, Riley and Penelope sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. For the first time since her arrival, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. Thank you, he said finally, for defending the ranch. Penelope turned to him, her face softened in the fading light. You sound surprised. I am, Riley admitted. I didn't think you had any reason to care about this place. Perhaps I wasn't defending just the place, she said quietly. The implication hung in the air between them. Riley found himself unable to look away from her face, noticing how the golden sunset caught in her blonde hair, how her blue eyes held a depth of feeling he had been too blind to see before. Before he could respond, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching fast. Riley reached for his rifle, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Daniel's distinctive hat. The sheriff brought grim news. The rustlers had raided the Peterson farm 10 miles east, burning buildings and stealing livestock. They're working their way through the valley, he explained. I've got men watching the passes, but they're clever. Been changing their patterns. What about Harper? Riley asked. The one Penelope shot. Sheriff Daniel's weathered face darkened. That's why I came straight here. Harper was overheard in the saloon, drunk and raging about the high and mighty Eastern woman who shot him. He's made some explicit threats. Riley felt cold fear grip him, not for himself, but for Penelope. When, 2 nights ago, he's had time to gather men and make plans. The sheriff looked between them. I'd recommend you both come to town until this blows over. No, Penelope said firmly, surprising both men. I won't be driven from another home by a man's threats. Riley found himself nodding in agreement. We'll stay and defend what's ours. The sheriff sighed, clearly expecting this response. I'll send Deputy Miller to stay with you tonight. I need to warn the other outlying ranches. After the sheriff departed, Riley turned to find Penelope watching him with an unreadable expression. What? He asked. You said what's ours, she observed. Not mine. Riley hadn't realized his choice of words. Figure of speech, he muttered, suddenly uncomfortable. Of course, Penelope replied, but her small smile suggested she didn't believe him. That night, with the deputy keeping watch outside, Riley found sleep impossible. His mind kept returning to Penelope's words. Perhaps I wasn't defending just the place. What had she meant? And why did the possibility that she might care for him both terrify and exhilarate him? For years, he had convinced himself that attachment was a luxury the frontier didn't allow. Everyone he had ever loved, his parents, his brother, had been taken from him. Yet here was Penelope, walking into his carefully constructed solitude and making him question everything he thought he knew about survival. The rustlers struck just before dawn, when the light was still gray and uncertain. Riley was already awake when the first shot cracked through the morning stillness. He grabbed his rifle and rushed downstairs to find Penelope already positioned at a window, his father's shotgun in her hands. They're at the north fence, she reported calmly. At least 6 of them. The deputy burst through the door. They're trying to surround the house. I've signaled for help, but it'll be an hour before anyone can get here. Riley felt a moment of pure panic. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Then he felt Penelope's hand on his arm, her touch steady and reassuring. We can hold them off, she said with quiet confidence. We just need to make it too costly for them to continue. Her certainty steadied him. They positioned themselves at different windows, taking careful shots whenever a rustler broke cover. The deputy was hit in the shoulder during the first exchange, but insisted he could still fight. As the sun climbed higher, the gunfire became more sporadic. The rustlers had clearly not expected such determined resistance. Riley was beginning to hope they might withdraw when he heard Penelope gasp. There, by the barn, she whispered urgently. They're trying to set fire to it. Riley peered through the window and saw a man crouched by the barn door, striking a match. If the barn went up, The house would surely follow in the dry autumn air. Without hesitation, Riley bolted for the back door. "Riley, no," Penelope cried, using his first name for the first time. But he was already running across the yard, firing as he went. He caught the arsonist with a shot to the arm, sending the man scrambling for cover. But as Riley turned to head back to the house, searing pain tore through his side. He stumbled, realizing he'd been hit. From somewhere distant, he heard Penelope screaming his name. Then everything went black. Riley drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of voices and movement around him. Sometimes he felt a cool hand on his forehead, heard soft words murmured in a voice that had become dear to him. Other times, there was only pain and darkness. When he finally opened his eyes fully, sunlight was streaming through his bedroom window. Penelope sat in a chair beside his bed, her head drooping in sleep, one hand still resting on the edge of his blanket, as if to maintain contact even as she rested. "Penelope," he whispered, his throat dry and voice rough. She startled awake immediately, relief flooding her face. "Riley, thank God." Without thinking, she reached for a cup of water and helped him drink. "The doctor said you were lucky." The bullet passed clean through. As his mind cleared, memories of the attack returned. "The rustlers." "Gone," Penelope assured him. "Sheriff Daniels and a posse arrived just after you were shot. They captured 3 of them, including Harper. The others won't be back." Riley tried to sit up, but winced at the pain in his side. "Lie still," Penelope admonished, gently pressing him back. "You've been unconscious for 2 days." 2 days? Riley was shocked. "You've been here the whole time?" A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die of stubbornness." Despite the pain, Riley found himself smiling. Then a thought occurred to him, wiping the smile away. "The neighbors who came to help, they'll be talking. About us. About you living here." "They already were," Penelope said matter-of-factly. "Martha Jenkins told me quite plainly that the entire county has been speculating since the day you brought me here." Riley felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "I'm sorry. I didn't consider how this arrangement might affect your reputation." Penelope's expression softened. "My reputation was hardly pristine after being auctioned in the town square." She paused, studying his face. "Does it bother you? What people think?" "No," Riley answered honestly. "But it should bother you." "Why?" "Because when your contract ends, you'll want to make a respectable life somewhere. Maybe even marry." The thought sent an unexpected pang through him. People's talk could make that difficult. Penelope was silent for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face. "Is that what you want for me? To leave when my contract ends?" Riley opened his mouth to give the answer he had always assumed, that of course she would leave, that their arrangement was temporary by nature. But the words wouldn't come. The thought of Penelope leaving, of returning to his solitary existence, now felt like a physical ache worse than his wound. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I used to think that being alone was the only way to survive out here, that caring for someone just meant eventual heartbreak. And now?" Penelope asked softly. Riley reached for her hand, his heart pounding harder than it had during the gunfight. "Now I think that surviving might not be enough anymore. That maybe there are things worth risking heartbreak for." Penelope's fingers tightened around his. "Like what?" "Like you," Riley said simply. The smile that illuminated her face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "It's about time you realized that, Riley Morgan." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been waiting months for you to see what was right in front of you." Riley brought his free hand up to brush a strand of blonde hair from her face. "I've been a slow student." "Indeed you have," Penelope agreed, but her tone was tender. "But you've finally learned the most important lesson of frontier life, which is that we survive better together than alone." As Penelope's lips met his in a gentle kiss, Riley knew that his understanding of the frontier had been fundamentally flawed. True strength wasn't in isolation, but in connection, in finding someone worth fighting alongside, worth building a life with. Spring came early to Montana that year, bringing with it new beginnings. The Morgan Ranch was transformed, fences mended, barn repainted, new crops planted in fields that had lain fallow for years. Most noticeable was the garden Penelope had established behind the house, now bursting with early vegetables and flowers. On a perfect May morning, neighbors from across the county gathered in that garden to witness something many had thought impossible: Riley Morgan taking a bride. Penelope stood radiant in a new dress of pale blue, her golden hair adorned with wildflowers. Riley, clean-shaven and wearing his best suit, could hardly believe his good fortune as he watched her walk toward him on Sheriff Daniel's arm. The contract that had brought them together had been ceremonially burned months ago, replaced by a different kind of agreement, one based on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than necessity. As they spoke their vows before the traveling minister, Riley reflected on how thoroughly Penelope had changed his understanding of frontier life. What he had once seen as harsh and unforgiving, she had shown him could be beautiful and abundant when shared. The isolation he had mistaken for strength had actually been fear of loss, fear of pain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and the small crowd erupted in cheers. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Riley and Penelope slipped away to the porch steps where they had first begun to truly see each other. "Happy, Mrs. Morgan?" Riley asked, still marveling at how natural the name sounded. Penelope leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible when I stepped off that train last year. I still can't believe that fool Peterson took one look at you and decided you weren't suitable for frontier life," Riley said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Penelope laughed softly. "It was the best rejection I've ever received. If he had kept his promise, I would never have found my way to you." "To think I almost rode away from that auction," Riley mused. "One moment of weakness changed everything." "It wasn't weakness," Penelope corrected him gently. "It was the first truly brave thing you'd done in years." Riley considered this. "How do you figure that?" "Because survival isn't brave, Riley. It's instinctive. Opening yourself to another person, risking your heart after you've lost so much, that takes real courage." From the yard came the sounds of laughter and music as their neighbors celebrated not just a wedding, but a community strengthened by shared hardship and mutual support. The rustlers' attack had brought together ranches that had previously kept to themselves, creating bonds that would help all of them not just survive but thrive. "I have plans for this place," Riley said, gazing out over the ranch that now felt truly like a home. "With the new breeding stock and the expanded fields, we could make something special here." "We already have," Penelope replied, her blue eyes shining with certainty. "But I'm looking forward to building more. Together." As twilight settled over the Montana landscape, Riley Morgan held his wife close and marveled at how completely his understanding of frontier life had been transformed. The harsh territory that had once seemed to demand solitude as the price of survival now felt full of possibility and connection. He had learned that true strength wasn't found in standing alone against adversity, but in finding someone worth standing with, someone who made the struggle meaningful and the victory sweeter for being shared. The frontier hadn't changed, but Riley had, and in that transformation, he had found not just survival, but a life worth living.